Okay, we're live. We're interviewing brother Rudi Mwongozi, extraordinary pianist and artist, Muslim brother who's relocated to the country of Ghana, and we're very fortunate to have him here today. And we're interviewing him, and so we have some questions for you, Rudi.
Okay.
All right,
All
so
right.
let's let's talk about this. The first question: how was your early childhood?
My early childhood was kind of, well, uh, first of all, I was raised by Southerners, which I call collard greens, fried chicken, and cornbread Southerners from Louisiana. And we were just, they were just all about music, and that was the main thing. And my early childhood, first of all, my entire childhood was unusual. I was a strange kid because I didn't. I'd rather play by myself than play with other kids, and a lot of kids thought that I was a strange person, and I am. You know, they asked Prince there was an interview he was doing, and they asked him, "Do you consider yourself weird?" And he said, "Yeah." But then he modified it. He said because he doesn't really think that. He just says, "I'm just going to go ahead and own it and go on with being myself because everybody else thinks so." So that once I kind of figured that, I just said, "Well, I can be myself and it's all right." But it took me a while in my early childhood. So one of the earliest things I talk about in the book was like being 4 years old in the bed. My mother put me in the bed. Next thing I know, I don't know where my other one sibling that had been born by then was, or where my father was that night. But all of a sudden, she dashes in the room, scoops me up, wraps me up in some blankets or something, tosses me in the car. Now we've moved to East Oakland by now, Brookfield Village. So she drives over to Wolf's Records. Now I'm dating myself, and anybody who remembers Wolf's Records in West Oakland, I think it was on 10th Street. And it was open until, I don't know, it was open. It was the one place that was open late. So she drives all the way from East Oakland, all the way to Wolf's Record because she has to get further on up the road by Bobby Blue Bland, who she had heard it on KSON, which later became KSOL, which which later on KSOL became an FM station. But early on it was KSOL and KDIA. So she heard it on one of those stations, and she had to get the record right then. So that when I reflected on that, it's like, okay, no wonder I'm like off my rocker about music because my parents were. And so the one thing that keeps coming up about my childhood is music because other than that, my childhood was kind of lonely and unremarkable, and I wasn't popular, or I didn't really I didn't really have a social life. In my social life was, I had some friends, my best friends in the hood, but my thing was music and my imagination and stuff like that. So that's what I remember about my early childhood.
So, when did you and your parents learn you had musical talent?
Well, we used to go over a friend's house. My recollection of this is uh, you know, and he had he had kids, so we used to go over there a lot, and he had a piano, and I. Uh, They noticed, my parents noticed, he noticed, I noticed along the same time that I could hear a song on the radio and just start playing it. It's Madison time, hit it. That kind of vibe. And I listened to that on the radio. It was a dance, right? And I could play those songs. I could hear a song and I could play it, and I could pick it out. And they were like, "Wow, you can do that." So I guess I was about 6 years old, and they decided to give me some piano lessons. But my father got frustrated with me because I wouldn't practice the stuff that the teacher gave me. I do my own thing, and then I'd be faking it. I'd be faking the funk. I'd go there and I'd just fake it. I wouldn't have practiced it, but I had these ears. I could read it and stuff. So after a while, though, my dad got a little bit. He didn't want to pay for the piano lessons. That's what it really was. And my grandmother took over. So my grandmother is really the hero in this story.
Now that's Dupree?
Della Dupree.
Della Dupree.
Yeah, Nee Jones, Della Jones. And then she married a guy named Elmer Dupree, who was my step-grandfather, who was the only grandfather I really knew because my mother's real father died early. So yeah, Della Dupree. And she wanted to get me playing music in the church. And I didn't want to play music in the church because I didn't like church. But that's a long story.
So now who gave you your first music lessons?
It was a lady named Mrs. Swain, and it was at Best Music in downtown Oakland. It was located on across the street or in the same neighborhood as what we used to call 10th Street Market, which is Swans.
Swans Market.
Yeah,
yes.
Swans, and then my Housewives Market was right in that neighborhood. Then they moved up to Broadway and 19th, I think, and I don't know if they're still even there. Nah. Okay. So my first music teacher was a lady named Mrs. Swain. Then when I dropped out for a minute and then went back, there was a teacher. It was a guy named Roberts, Mr. Roberts, and those were my first teachers.
Now you seem to have it seemed like you identified with him more because he had you playing more contemporary songs, or
well, I don't know if I identified with him more, but I think that one of the points I had made in the book is that he wasn't. If he was classically trained, he didn't classically train me, so I wasn't classically trained, and he gave me just contemporary songs that you were hearing every day, which is something I do with my students now. I give them songs that they hear and they know, and I don't drill them endlessly over and over all day with just exercises. I give them stuff to play so that they can kind of like identify this as something that I wanted to do. Because sometimes you get into music and you realize how tedious the practices are, and you be like, oh God, do I really want to do this? So I kind of mix it up. And so anyway, that was something that he did. Yeah.
So you didn't like what? How is it the Ada
Richard
method
book? Well, it was okay. It was just for kids. It was for babies. I mean, it was for kids. Mm-hmm. And I don't even remember some of the stuff that they was just simple stuff. Just that kind of stuff. But after a while, I would take it and do something with it. I would do other stuff.
And people were like, "Why are you playing that?
Why are you playing that?"
Uh-huh.
And it was like I had something in me that was like resistant to being shamed out of it. Fortunately for me, because I had teachers later on that told me that they didn't say that it was wrong or it wasn't good. They just said I can't do that because it didn't follow specific rules of composition, and I didn't care about that. I just knew it sounded good. So the Ada Richard method book was what Mrs. Swain used. Then later on, I don't think Mr. Roberts used that. I think Mr. Roberts used some other kind of book. I forget who his thing was. But he had me playing, pop songs by Henry Mancini, and who wrote Peter Gunn and wrote Pink Panther and stuff like that.
Can you give us some Peter Gunn? Can you remember that?
Let's see. Yeah.
That's it, yes.
I know, anyway.
I love it, yes. Yeah. Yes. So, would you say that you come from a musical family?
I would say that I come from a musical family and that they all love music, and then all four of my siblings kind of grew up musical. I think my kids can say that they grew up in a musical family.
Because your son plays the drums,
My
right?
son Issa plays drums.
Uh-huh.
My daughter Naima sings and dances.
Mm-hmm.
My oldest son Rahman, he's what they call makes beats, as the hip hoppers know.
Sure, sure.
So, and then Issa's mother also plays. She's a folk singer, and her brother, Issa's uncle, is also was a rock guitarist. So my kids grew up in a musical family. I grew up in a music-loving family. That's the deal.
Were you a church musician?
No. As I was just kind of intimating, my grandmother kind of like wanted me to be a church musician, and I didn't like church. As I talk about it in the book, you know, it was like the service went on too long. The preacher's sermon definitely went on too long, and then when they would catch the Holy Ghost, that was really excruciatingly embarrassing, and I hated to see my grandmother doing that. It's like, why do you have to do that? So, and then of course, you know, if you grew up Baptist.
I grew up Catholic and Baptist.
Oh wow!
I
Man,
know.
you had a double whammy.
So yeah, I have.
So yeah, so it was church. It was Sunday school from 9 to 11. Morning service from 9 to 1. We go home, get a little snack. 11 to 2. Go home and eat. No, not a snack. Big Sunday thing. Come back for BTU, Baptist Training Union, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Then evening service from 7 p.m. to 9. That was too much church. Then if you was in the choir, you had choir rehearsal on Wednesday. If you was in an usher, you had an usher board meeting on Tuesday or Thursday. So, no, I didn't care for it. But as I grew older, I started to understand how some of our African heritage and tradition and sentiment and emotion was stored in those Baptist church services. And even the Catholics, you mentioned Catholics, like the black Catholics started trying to incorporate gospel music and get more black in their liturgy. You know, they had a big fight. There was a big fight about that within the Catholic Church.
Actually, my grandmother went to the Vatican with Father Stallings.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, but that's part of my story. But yeah,
Okay.
I'm familiar with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, that was the thing. I didn't like church, and now I do churches. I play in churches. Well, I played in Wose Church at the Temple of the African Way.
And we loved you there. We hated when you left. When
Well,
you had to
you know,
leave.
and I hated leaving in it because in a way, you know, I found out where my audience, if I can use that word, because I don't have fans. I have friends who buy my music. I don't have fans. Stevie Wonder has fans. but I found out where my audience was with Wose and the culture people. Everybody has an audience, you know. James Taylor has an audience.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
Kenny G has an audience.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
Dolly Parton has an audience. So I didn't know where mine was because I was doing all this stuff. I was doing jazz. I'm doing everything. And so that's what Wose did for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what was the pursuit of science and music? Was that your idea?
Well, it was more my dad's idea because he wanted, first of all, he didn't want me and my brother to be a construction plumber or a laborer, a day laborer like him. Even though it gave him a steady job and a steady paycheck and health benefits and retirement and all of that, but he wanted us to be better. So he wanted me to be an engineer. And I was in it. I was telling people I'm going to be an engineer when I was in school, because you don't tell people you want to be. You don't tell everybody that you want to be a musician because they're like, okay, what do you want to do for a real job? So yeah, I oriented myself toward math, science, things like that, and taking higher math, algebra, trig, algebra, geometry, trig, analytic geometry, calculus. I did the whole thing. And but all the while, in my heart of hearts, I always really knew, even if I didn't admit to myself, that I wanted to be a musician. So when I really got into jazz and really started looking into people, it really, really started leaning into the artists that I love, like Coltrane and Miles Davis and Dizzy Gillespie and Lee Morgan. And
That leads me to the next question.
Mhm.
Who were your musical heroes?
Well, my main musical hero is John Coltrane. For many, well, I have three that I say are my favorite musicians. My three favorite musicians are John Coltrane, Miles Davis, and Jimi Hendrix. People will be surprised at that, but so because I say, well, are there saxophone players that maybe when I was 17, maybe I would have said Gene Ammons was my favorite saxophone player, and my favorite trumpet player I might say Lee Morgan on a given day, but Miles is my favorite musician. Train is my favorite musician, even if he's my favorite saxophone too. And Jimi Hendrix, I mean, I love Freddie King, and I love Carlos Santana and Wes Montgomery, and I love all kind of great guitar players. But my favorite musician, who I never get tired of reading about, writing about, listening to. So those were three, and then Stevie, of course, Stevie Wonder. And
all giants.
Yeah.
All giants.
Yeah.
So could you
Curtis
explain
Mayfield.
Curtis Mayfield? All right, that's yeah.
It'd be too long. It'd be a long list.
Sure. But no, those are. I mean, if you just stay with those, it speaks volumes. Could you explain your spiritual connection that you have with John Coltrane's music?
Well, my father was responsible for me being a jazz lover, but at some point he said that Train left him, and that Train's music got too avant-garde, too esoteric, and he couldn't deal with it anymore. So he went back to what he loved, which was Gene Ammons and Stanley Turrentine, and that vibe, right?
Charlie Parker.
Charlie Parker. Yeah, he liked Charlie Parker, but he preferred James Moody to Charlie Parker. Because Charlie Parker, again, Charlie Parker was blues, but he was very complex. But he liked Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and Clifford Brown and all those great cats. So Train's music kind of wasn't in my house for a while. And then when I went to college, we got a hold of A Love Supreme. And we listened to that. We had a listening session on A Love Supreme, and we was like, wow, what did we just listen to? So A Love Supreme.
Yeah, you speak about that in the book. You were with two friends,
Yeah.
and both of them were kind of quiet.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you're like, wow, what did we?
Yeah, one of them is not quiet. Ben and Daryl, my two friends.
Okay.
Ben from the brother from L.A. and Daryl from Hawaii. Daryl's kind of quiet usually, but Ben is very loquacious, and Ben was saying nothing. He was like transfixed. We were transfixed and transformed. But then, so that record became my constant companion. Then I moved to Portland to go to college. I went to Portland State University, and I was enrolled there. And so I had a few tough nights because I didn't really have a scholarship, and so I had some tough economic nights and some tough times. And so the first time that I tried to fast for the month of Ramadan and not eat, I didn't know how to do it, and I got discouraged and I stopped the fast. So I was demoralized and broke. So I was right in the place to hear A Love Supreme the way John Coltrane wanted you to hear it. And so this one night I heard it, and I had an epiphany. And it's spiritual. It was a spiritual experience from A Love Supreme. Yeah. And from that night, I literally demarcate my life from that night. Before it was one way, and after it was this way. Yeah. Okay.